On December 24th, 2001, Brian Godlock runs frantically through the streets of Las Palomas, Texas, wearing a cheery red Christmas sweater that is now splattered with blood. He recklessly chases after two speeding cars that are engulfed in a raging gun battle. After one car spins out of control and crashes, Brian viciously attacks the second vehicle. The terrified drivers attempt to flee, but are gruesomely killed after being crushed by a forklift that Brian rams them into. Playa, the notorious leader of a ruthless local gang, emerges from the car and angrily confronts Brian. He shoots Brian twice, first in the back and then directly in the throat, leaving him to die in the street amidst the smoldering wreckage. Brian is rushed to the hospital in critical condition, clinging to life. As doctors hurriedly operate on Brian's wounds, cheerful Christmas music echoes ironically through the halls. Brian's distraught wife, Saya, arrives at the hospital covered in her husband's blood. Detective Dennis Vassell, who has been investigating Playa's gang, also comes to check on Brian's status. Over the next several weeks, Saya patiently helps Brian recover, but the damage to his throat has left him unable to speak. After being hospitalized for a month, Brian is finally discharged and allowed to return home. However, on the drive back, Brian grows increasingly angry and agitated as they pass by endless signs of the raging gang violence that has overrun their neighborhood. In a fit of rage, he rips off the cross necklace he has worn since childhood and hurls it out the window. When they arrive home, Brian breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably. He reads a newspaper article about how his young son, Taylor, was tragically killed by a stray bullet during a shootout between Playa's gang and their rivals. Tormented by grief and thoughts of revenge, Brian turns to alcohol to numb his pain. As the liquor flows, he has a horrific flashback to that fateful Christmas Eve morning when his beloved son was so senselessly murdered. In the present day, Saya desperately tries to break through to Brian, communicating through tender text messages, but he ignores her heartfelt pleas. In April, driven by vengeance, Brian goes to visit Detective Vassell at the local precinct. He snaps photos of the many pictures of known gang members, including Playa, that litter the office walls. At home, Brian creates a detailed murder board, documenting key information about Playa's criminal organization. On his calendar, he chillingly writes, "Kill them all for the upcoming Christmas Eve," exactly 1 year after his son's death. Over the next 8 months, Brian ruthlessly prepares for his revenge. He rigorously trains his body, learning hand-to-hand combat skills and mastering various weapons. He studies Playa's gang, gathering intel on their operations. Brian and Saya drift further and further apart as his obsession with vengeance consumes him entirely. Saya eventually moves out, unable to cope with the angry, volatile stranger her husband has become. As Christmas Eve rapidly approaches, Brian meticulously puts his plan into action. He conducts careful surveillance on Playa's gang headquarters, gathering evidence of their illegal activities. Through binoculars, he documents them handling large stashes of cash and automatic weapons. He also photographs Playa having sex with his sultry girlfriend, Venus. As the day draws nearer, Saya texts Brian expressing her deep concern for him and pleading with him to reach out to his family. But Brian ignores her messages, hell-bent on vengeance. On December 23rd, Brian stages the first act of his vengeful rampage. He breaks into the home of Anthony, Playa's money handler, and brutally attacks him. Bringing him back to his garage, Brian ties Anthony up and attempts to force him to reveal information about Playa's gang operations. Anthony manages to escape briefly, and the two engage in a brawl throughout the house. Though Anthony stabs Brian twice, he overpowers Anthony and knocks him unconscious again. On Christmas Eve, Brian arms himself heavily and sets out to hunt down Playa and his crew. He drives by Saya's new home and observes her through the window, seeming happy and at peace as she works on a painting inspired by memories of their late son. He then visits Taylor's grave, solemnly opening a wrapped present he brought, a train set they had planned to give Taylor before his untimely death. Meanwhile, Detective Vassell gets an unexpected knock at his door and is shocked to find Anthony bound and gagged on his doorstep. A Christmas card left with the captive includes a USB drive full of Brian's extensive research into Playa's criminal activities and plans, including information beaten out of Anthony. It ends with a chilling note: "What you should have done. It ends tonight. Under the cover of darkness, Brian begins tracking down Playa's network of dealers and enforcers. He follows two men outside of a seedy bar and violently interrupts their attempted robbery of a young woman, putting them against a brick wall with his car. He ruthlessly stabs one in the stomach before shooting the other mid-attempt to climb atop the vehicle. Overcome by the gory brutality, Brian vomits but proceeds undaunted to send a violent warning. He throws a gruesome note over Playa's compound wall, containing two severed fingers from the men he just killed. One of Playa's thugs discovers the sadistic delivery and brings it immediately to Playa, now lounging smugly in a Santa robe. Brian arrives at a chaotic nearby shootout between rival gangs and police. He joins the fray and massacres numerous men with his car while cops dive for cover. He attempts to rescue a wounded female officer, but she is shot dead before he can reach her. A surviving gang member films Brian's rampage and rapidly sends the footage to Playa. In response, Brian stalks down the man and films his own execution video, sending it directly to Playa as a chilling promise of retribution. The rattled Playa orders his terrifying enforcer Ruiz to eliminate Brian before he can strike again. Ruiz accosts Brian, initiating a dangerous high-speed chase and shootout that leaves all of Ruiz's henchmen dead. Now badly injured, Brian manages to escape. With his car too damaged to continue, he steals a motorcycle and heads directly for Playa's heavily guarded compound. Brian breaches the compound's perimeter, his immense arsenal of guns and knives at the ready. Moving floor by floor, he ruthlessly shoots down all opposition, leaving behind a trail of carnage. Playa remains oblivious in the upstairs penthouse, snorting cocaine and dancing with Venus. As Brian nears the top floor, Ruiz appears again for a final confrontation. The two engage in a long, brutal fight to the death that ends when Brian executes Ruiz with a single shot to the head. Detective Vassal arrives at the compound, attempting to stop the madness. He shoots several of Playa's men before encountering a cornered, severely wounded Brian. Weapon drawn, he hesitates to pull the trigger, seeing the pain and loss fueling Brian's crusade. A wordless exchange ends when Venus appears, cackling maniacally and firing a machine gun. As she empties her clip, Brian shields Vassal, refusing to see another good cop die. Venus grabs a new weapon, but Brian shoots her down. As she collapses, she lands 2 bullets into Vassal's stomach. Enraged, Brian storms Playa's opulent penthouse lair. Bullets fly as the sworn enemies shoot it out. Despite multiple gunshot wounds, Brian presses on. As Playa moves in for the kill shot, a bloodied Vassal re-emerges and uses his last ounce of strength to shoot Playa dead. Brian finishes the job by strangling Playa's lifeless body in a final act of vengeance. Having completed his crusade, Brian drags himself next to the dying Vassal. The two lay side by side, both bleeding out rapidly. As Brian begins to lose consciousness, he is flooded by cherished memories of his dear son Taylor and painful visions of the life stolen from him. Sometime later, at Taylor's modest grave, Saya reads a heartbreaking note from Brian. He apologizes for the violence and darkness that consumed him after their son's death. He knows there is nothing that can make it right, but he felt compelled to die trying to avenge his murder. While she mourns her husband's fate, Saya is filled with the faint hope that Brian and Taylor are finally reunited in a better place. The movie ends here. Thanks for watching.